Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tales from the Albright. We are still here with Brianna, and we're still talking about Twilight.
We'll forever be talking about
I know,
Twilight.
right?
This is just what you get to hear.
I think it's a generational thing. Like,
It
Twilight
is.
had such an impact.
Yes, it was like that fundamental like pop culture piece. Like I know Anna, who still works in the for the library, has said that like they had the Twilight Ball for the teens back when she did teen programming, and it was holy tamale. It was a phenomenon.
It really was. I remember it was like the few times, because I was never like a YouTuber person, but there was like one account where I'd watch their Twilight reviews.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's got a cultural like movement to it that I think, I don't even know if anything now really has that. Like there's been some big like pop culture stuff for like teens and things like that, but I don't know that anything has quite been Twilight level, and it's coming back.
Yes.
The teens now.
It goes through a cycle.
Like it. Yeah. We have a teen who comes to our programs who is obsessed with Twilight. So it was nice because I could be like, oh, I know those characters.
Yes.
I know. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think very much so.
Yeah.
So I feel like in last episode, we should have touched on more of the book itself. So what are your thoughts about the storyline?
So I found this interesting in that this, as a sort of like quintessential paranormal romance, is that what you would say genre-wise
Yeah.
is the category? It's interesting because I feel like she does a relatively good job of the paranormal pieces to me, which again, may be a controversial statement, but I like the way that she like explains it and explores it, and like we learn it in an effective way and it works in with the plot. The romance part kills me because like I just can't, the famous line that's like was quoted romantically in the early 2000s and now more ironically is the whole line about I'm gonna butcher it if I try and say
The
it.
like personal brand of heroin one?
Oh no, that too. But the one where it's like there's two things I know for certain. Is it two or is it three?
It's three.
Three things I know
Yeah,
for certain.
Edward's a vampire, something else, and
I'm completely and
irrevocably.
irrevocably.
Yeah.
Oh, is it irrevocably?
I think it's irrevocably.
Irrevocably in love with him. I say it wrong. But yeah, now I want to know that quote. But yeah, it's like. It's just one of those where that to me, I heard that quote so much, but it came out of nowhere that she just decided that she was just utterly in love with him and obsessed with him. And I'm like, you have barely started to speak to him. Like, I can't. And I know that's common in a lot of romances, but I will say it felt just so out of the blue and kind of random. I will say, let me see.
Here it is.
We gotta find it.
Yes, I looked it up in the book.
About three things I was absolutely positive. First, Edward was a vampire. Second, there was a part of him, and I didn't know how potent that part might be, that thirsted for my blood. How could I forget that line?
I don't know.
And third, I was unconditionally and irrevocably in love with him. See, so dramatic. Very teen, I guess, in that
Yes.
sense. But like it was just a lot to me. I feel like in the books we at least get a better sense of like their teasing and having like that kind of sassy relationship.
Yeah.
It still was very like, oh gosh, this is so cringy.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's just like,
I'm in love with him.
yeah.
Like he hates me and I smell bad. And now like we're like what, 50 pages later and we're in love with him? Like it's a bit quick for me. But yeah, so that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it does go very quick. Like there's a very quick switch, and I forgot how quick it was from like the first date to the baseball game to her being like, I'm leaving forever, like have to run away from James and Laurent and Victoria.
Oh, and that was something else I thought of, which is, I will say, we all like to joke, because we like our readers, that like most of the time the book is better than the movie. Like that's the trope. But, and in this case, at least with Bella, I think the book is better than the movie. However, the one thing I think the movie has, if I remember correctly, that is helpful is that we see the James, Laurent, Victoria bad guys from the beginning.
Yes.
Like they tease that they will come, and then they like filter their plot in more, whereas it felt like as I was listening, I was like, okay, so we've got the romance, they're together, like I'm like, there's a lot of this that happened and we still haven't reached the big bad. So like the antagonist of our story hasn't arrived yet. And it feels kind of weird that it's that very last bit where we encounter them, it goes wrong immediately, and then we have to resolve it. Like I like that in the movie they sort of work it in there so that you're like anticipating it.
Know what's going on.
Yeah, like you see it coming. It helps you
There's
kind of
the news
learn.
reports.
Yes, you like get to learn more about the vampires a little bit because you're like, okay, you see these other vampires. So like I did feel like that is something that would have been helpful in the plot itself.
Yes. And I also wonder if that's just something that, because it was her very first book, it was based on a dream, that it just didn't get worked in that early.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense.
Because I also think Twilight came out around the time where the young adult genre was kind of becoming a thing.
Yes, it was still like developing, I think.
So I think if it was something that was written like today, that might have been something that had been included.
That's true. Good point. I like it.
Yeah. We also need to talk about music in Twilight.
I'm curious. You've got to take the lead here and walk me through your thoughts because I'm not as musically inclined as you.
Okay, so for every single book, she made a playlist.
Okay.
And on the playlist, very classic tunes, right? So I have the one for Twilight up now. And it has like Radiohead, Coldplay, My Chemical Romance, Linkin Park, Muse. Like just a whole slew of bands.
Yeah, angsty teen stuff, it
Yes.
feels like, yeah.
And then I believe for New Moon, she like broke it out by character, like which song was for which character.
Ah.
And then I believe when they're in there and Bella's like, I put on loud music with like slightly too much guitar to fall asleep. I believe at some point that was confirmed that she intended it to be Muse's CD.
Interesting. Okay.
But now there's this, like with the revival, there's this whole thing that like My Chemical Romance was the actual influence, but it was always Muse. Because she was a diehard fan of Muse and probably still is.
Huh. I wonder if that's part of the revival because I feel like a lot of the teens that come to our programs are also very into like emo music and stuff. Like when I asked them to pick a theme for bingo last year, they wanted it to be emo themed. And I was like,
done emo bingo.
I made it punk bingo, so I went kind of similar. But I was like, emo just is like, I feel like the connotations of it are slightly different.
Yes.
But it's interesting because I'm like, maybe is this all part of it? Like this sort of revival of the early 2000s?
Very possible.
It's like the opposite of recession pop. It's recession emo.
Which then led into recession pop.
Yes.
Back in the day.
Really? Tell me, historian of the early 2000s. You know these things.
Well, because if you think about like, because it was emo being one of the mainstays, and like it still is a mainstay. Like Fall Out Boy's still around. Everyone gets very excited whenever My Chemical Romance has a show or tour. Like people are just coming back, especially with the festivals being created now that are specifically targeted. But back then, it was kind of just like not like kind of on the outskirts. But then once like the 2008 recession hit, it turned into more of a like, well, we don't know what's going on anymore. So it turned more to like Kesha. And then that's when you got like Cobra Starship going from emo to like You Make Me Feel and like being on tour with Justin Bieber. So it like followed this trend where things got like very like party music because everything's awful.
Okay, interesting. It's like how does culture, it reminds me of our 90s podcast, where it's like how does culture reflect the way that people are feeling about the world and society?
Yeah, because if you listen to a lot of recession pop, it's just like no one has money. I think it's in Down by, I forget who sings it, but it features Lil Wayne, and he just has a line that's like, I'm down like the economy.
That was such a good line. That's not Tayo Cruz.
No.
What is, T-Pain?
No, it's like Sean something, I think.
Sean Kingston?
No, it's Jay Sean.
Jay Sean.
Jay Sean featuring Lil Wayne, Down.
Now I need to listen to that after this.
Yeah, so you have like all of that kind of developed out of that, of like, it went from I am sad and I'm going to make angry sad music to I am sad, I'm going to party.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. And so my question then is that when I think of Twilight music, I didn't think very much about the first movie, but I feel like by the last movie, they have that very, I don't know, like the sweet, soft music in that playlist. So it's interesting how that also, I feel like, changes.
It follows the trend.
Yeah.
Because like on the first CD, you had some absolute great songs. You had like Decode by Paramore.
Also, is this playlist the songs that play during the movie at some point, or no? This is separate?
No, so she had her own separate playlist.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I couldn't remember then.
There's the official soundtrack, which has Supermassive Black Hole by Muse, very classic baseball scene.
Yes.
Everyone knows it.
Yes.
You had like the Black Ghost.
Sorry, that's me interpreting the baseball scene.
Very, kinda.
You can only experience that visual if you watch. So if you're only listening right now, you need to watch us reenact the baseball scene.
I do remember with the movie soundtrack, I was very obsessed by the fact that Robert Pattinson had a few songs.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That's him?
Yeah. He did Never Think, and then he had another one too. And then you would go on YouTube and you'd find his other stuff that's like very poorly recorded acoustic songs.
Wow. Okay. So I am taking this home tonight, and we're gonna watch this because need to re-experience this.
Yeah, the Twilight soundtrack has never left my like playlist.
I like that
because
that is great.
It's such a good soundtrack. So
yes. And see, the fun part of why Alyssa and I decided to discuss Twilight is because next we are going to be discussing Dracula.
Yes.
Because I've never read it, and Alyssa has a problem and is addicted to it. So I
don't have a problem.
She's a bit obsessed with Dracula. Vampires. We're just gonna go with that.
Well, vampires is more accurate.
Yes. So I was thinking this would be a fun one because then we can sort of go into Dracula and be like, okay, because isn't Dracula the first vampire story? No. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm probably, I'm teasing what will come in the Dracula episode.
No, Dracula popularized it, and it wasn't like well known, but the first one is literally just a book called Vampire.
Okay. So like,
I believe that was the John Priori. I don't know how you say his name, but he was in that same group with like Mary Shelley and Lord Byron during the volcano-induced wintry summer.
Yeah, where they had the writing contest.
At the lake.
Yes. Okay. So that's good to know. Okay.
And I think there was probably one before that. I think there's like a few myths and legends from like ancient history that could technically be considered the first vampire stories. But I don't know them off the top of my head.
Okay. So then Twilight is just like, this is like the cultural zeitgeist for 21st century vampire imaginings.
Basically. Well, yeah, 21st century, because then you also had Interview with a Vampire. That was like 80s, 90s.
And Buffy and things?
Yeah, Buffy.
Yeah, Buffy. So like Twilight, I feel like, did it differently and did it in a way that's easy to satirize now. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I will say it's interesting because I feel like with the vampire revival, it still is so rooted in Twilight that you can like joke about it, but like especially like the sparkling thing, I feel like that's one of the biggies. But it's still like such a cultural moment, you know?
It really is.
Like it wouldn't be popular if it were that bad. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say that. That's not a factual statement. That's not true. But you know what I mean by that.
I know what you mean.
Alyssa is an educated individual who would not choose to indulge in such if it weren't some way quality, you know?
I don't know if I would say that.
That's also not true.
You know some of the things I've read.
That's true. That's it. That's true. That's a good point.
If anyone has questions about things, they can convince me to read it, because then it gets me wondering, and then I'll just read things. So
yeah, Alyssa would read it if you just dared her to read it. She would just read it to experience it. Yep, that makes
to report back.
Just to report back. Yeah, that makes sense.
But I do think Twilight has something that really captures your brain when you are in middle school and like trying to figure out your life, because you're like, oh, Bella's super awkward and super clumsy, and you're like, I relate to that.
Yes. Yeah, but somehow every boy is obsessed with her. So it's like one of those where I'm like, oh gosh. All of the really awkward stuff with like Mike Newton and Tyler, and you're like, oh my goodness, like I can't. It's something.
Yeah, but I think it's just one of those things that when you're growing up, there's something in it that just grabs you.
Yeah, there is. It is appealing in that way. Especially like as a romance sort of thing for like people who are into that sort of thing.
Yeah, and like an introduction into like romance genre and romance tropes.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. And I do love, it's really cute because people joke about the whole like Edward is old fashioned thing, but it is kind of adorable in the book, I feel like, when he is very, talks about things where he's like, well, I come from a time where like courting was a thing.
Yeah.
So it's like really I don't know, I find him like adorable in the books.
It's like quaint.
Yes, it is. It is very quaint. And it is very like friendly, I guess, in that way to middle school audiences where you're like, oh, this is cute. And like, this is what like you might imagine for like a boyfriend or something.
Yeah, and there was nothing like overly like detailed or in depth.
Yeah, it's not like a graphic sort of one.
Yeah.
Like I remember, if I'm not mistaken, 50 Shades of Grey came out like not long after this and was based on Twilight,
Yeah,
right?
she wrote a fan fiction on her cell phone on the subway and then published that, and then that is what was taken and adapted into 50 Shades of Grey.
And funnily, based on the age I was when they were both coming out, my mother let me read Twilight, but I was not allowed to read 50 Shades of Grey. So like I still to this day have not read it.
I haven't either because I had no interest.
No, by the time it became like I was age appropriate to read it, I was like, no, I don't want to. So like Twilight is that nice, safer space, I think, for younger readers in a lot of ways, and I like
to
that.
try and get an introduction into like paranormal romance and like romance in general.
Yes.
And I know there have been things over the years where it's like problematic and all this stuff, but I think when you're in middle school, you're not really looking at it with a critical eye. It's just when you get older, you're like, oh,
No.
that's a thing. Like most things.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, do you have any last thoughts?
This was joy. I love nostalgia. I love nostalgia reads. It brings me pleasure. I'd love to know for the like listeners and viewers of the podcast, like if you experienced Twilight at like what point in your life was it? Did you also have this feeling about it, or did you just feel completely differently than we did? Because Alyssa and I, at least the moment in which we experienced it for the first time, I think is carried through with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Well, if you have any thoughts, feel free to let us know. So comment on the YouTube video. You can also comment on the Facebook posts I make to promote any of them, or the Instagram one. If you have any questions, have any suggestions for books that we need to do in the future after Dracula, please let us know. You can contact me at aloney@albright.org. That is ALONEY@albright.org. Or you can call the library at 570-348-3000. Thank you.